One of the most difficult financial goals is to get the goalpost to stop moving. When have you had enough? In the third chapter of his book, The Psychology of Money, Morgan Housel entitles that chapter Never Enough. And he starts with a true story about two very wealthy men, and they're on this island at the home of a billionaire. And one of them looks to the other, I think he looks to Joseph Heller, and he says, "Do you realize that this billionaire hedge fund manager has made more money in a single day than you've made in your whole lifetime since you've written the book Catch-22, which was a very popular book. You've made a lot of money, but he makes more in a single day than you may have made that whole time that your book has been published." And the author of the book, Heller, looked at his friend and he said, "Yeah, but I have something that billionaire, the guy who's hosting us at his huge mansion, I have something that he will never have." And his friend looked at him, what could that be? And he said, "I have enough. I'm good with where I'm at." Part of what this book, The Psychology of Money, looks at, when do you have enough? When you become a millionaire, when you get 10 million, when you get 100 million, when you get 500 million, when you get $1 billion? Because most people think to be rich, I just need a little bit more. Housel tells the story of Rajat Gupta, who grew up in Calcutta, India. He was orphaned as a teenager. He had very little opportunity compared to what most of us have had. And his life really became, in many ways, a rags to riches story. By his mid-40s, Gupta was the CEO of McKinsey. He retired from that to take a job with the World Economic Forum. He had become incredibly wealthy, very successful. In fact, he was tagged as being one of the few people in the world who was worth at least $100 million. By all accounts, he wasn't content with that. He wanted to be a billionaire. So while he was on the board of Goldman Sachs, Gupta, who had gone from rags to riches, had this desire to be a billionaire, and he participated in something called insider trading. For example, when Sachs was going through a rough patch, they found out that Warren Buffett was going to make a huge investment in them to make sure that they stayed stable. Obviously, that investment was going to prop them up and their stock price would soar when people found out about this investment from Warren Buffett. So within a few seconds of finding out himself as a board member, Gupta called one of his friends who was a stockbroker, who immediately bought 175,000 shares of Goldman Sachs. When it shot up, that was worth well over $1 million. When they actually went to trial, they said that Gupta and his friend Rajartaman, who both ended up going to prison, had made $17 million in profits based on insider trading. So he ended up going to prison for something illegal, insider trading, when he already was worth $100 million. The author points out that if you had $100 million invested, and if it even averaged just 5%, which historically the stock market, if you reinvest dividends, averages closer to 10%, but even at 5%, that would earn you $600 an hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. For most people, doesn't it seem like $100 million would be enough? But when you get there, it's easy to keep moving the goalpost. And he talks about Bernie Madoff, who part of maybe the biggest Ponzi scheme in history. Before that Ponzi scheme, Housel points out, he was a market maker, a job that matches buyers and sellers of stocks, and he was really good at it. And he actually quotes from an article about Madoff back in '92 that says he's built a highly profitable securities firm, Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities, which siphons a huge volume of stock trades away from the big board. The $740 million average daily volume of trades executed electronically by the Madoff firm off the exchange equals 9% of New York's exchange. And Housel points out, this isn't somebody who just didn't realize at the time that he was involved in a Ponzi scheme. This was legitimate business that he initially did before he started the Ponzi scheme. A former staffer said the market-making arm of Madoff's businesses made between $25 million and $50 million per year. In other words, his legitimate, non-fraudulent business was a huge success. It made him very, very wealthy, and yet he committed fraud that would send him to prison, I think probably for the rest of his life, because he wanted to make more. And the author says this, Housel says this, the question we should ask of both Gupta and Madoff is why someone worth hundreds of millions of dollars would be so desperate for more money that they risked everything in pursuit of even more. And he points out, if somebody who's worth nothing tries to rob a bank, it's wrong, it's a sin, but you partially understand it. But someone who has enough money to live comfortably the rest of their life, why would they risk everything trying to get more? And that's where he goes through some of these principles. And the first principle, the hardest financial skill, is making sure those goalposts don't move. The second point he says is that social comparison is the problem. He gives a really interesting analogy. He says, think about a rookie baseball player. He's one of the few people in the world that's playing in Major League Baseball, and he's making $500,000 a year. He's probably really, really happy. But then Housel asks, what if he plays on the same team as Mike Trout? And when this book came out, Mike Trout had just signed a huge contract. His contract was worth $36 million a year, a 12-year contract, $430 million. So if you're making $500,000 a year, that sounds great, except your teammate is making $36 million a year. And you can start to get jealous. You can start to get greedy. We can compare ourselves with the neighbors. We can want to keep up with the Joneses. It's interesting because Housel says Trout was making $36 million a year. But if you were going to be in the top 5 or 10 hedge fund managers in the world, guess how much you'd make? If God does bless us with financial success, we just keep wanting more. And that's why Housel titles chapter 3, Never Enough. The third point he makes is that enough is not too little. He said it's not ridiculous to stop at some point. We do this when we eat, right? I mean, the only way to know how much you could eat is just to eat and eat and eat until you get sick. But hopefully we eat, and then when we're full, we stop eating. And at some point, you have to realize I've made enough, because it's easy for the millionaire to want the 100 million, and when you get the 100 million to want the billion, instead of realizing I'm happy, I'm satisfied, I'm content with what I have. The fourth point he makes in this chapter is that there are so many things that are never worth risking in order to try to gain more. And clearly with Madoff and Gupta, he's given examples of people who risked going to jail. They actually were willing to do something illegal to try to make more when they already were worth multiple millions of dollars. It's never worth risking your reputation, your integrity, your relationship with your family. As a Christian, your relationship with the Lord. Okay, there's some things you should never risk in the pursuit of more. Money ultimately does not satisfy. In fact, Scripture says the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. He told the story of Rajat Gupta, and towards the end of the chapter, he has a quote from Gupta to the New York Times after he finally got out of prison, and he says this: "Don't get too attached to anything, your reputation, your accomplishments, or any of it. I think about it now. What does it matter? Okay, this thing destroyed my reputation. That's only troubling if I'm so attached to my reputation." And Housel says this seems like the worst possible takeaway from his experience. And what I imagine is the comforting self-justifications of a man who desperately wants his reputation back. Housel says your reputation is invaluable. Freedom is invaluable. Family and friends are invaluable. I would say integrity, your relationship with the Lord, those things are invaluable. So this chapter, Never Enough, is a great reminder. Yes, work hard, try to be intelligent, invest wisely, and there are good things that can come from finances, that you can be a blessing to other people if God gives you financial success, but you need to learn when to stop, when enough is enough.